church membership and the other ones, many other ones actually. But anyway, he was speaking and they were talking about the balance of the governments of this world and church, and the focus that goes on. And we're entering election time. We had a debate, and it was interesting, to say the least. But I just want to encourage you to keep your focus on the gospel, right? It's not that we don't want to ignore the elections that are coming up, but we don't want to be consumed by the elections that are coming up. And so Lehman was talking at this conference, and he gave this illustration. I thought it was really good. He said, if you were to think of the angels, right? In 1 Peter it says that the angels long to look into the things, speaking in that case about when Christ would come and that type of thing. And we know that there's rejoicing in heaven when someone gets saved and that type of thing. He said, if you would imagine the break room for the angels. Okay, so this is, when they've got a little break, they go into the break room and there's TVs everywhere in the break room. And on the TVs is the news being reported about the churches. What's going on at Faith Baptist Church in Palmhurst? What's going on at First Baptist in McAllen? What's going on at Grace Presbyterian Church? And all these different things. That's kind of what's going on, and that's what they're interested in. And then he said, and sure, there's a ticker that runs at the bottom, like on the news sites that says, election upcoming in the United States of America, right? And so that kind of reflects what our focus needs to be. We need to be about Christ's mission. We need to be about the gospel, because that's the most important thing, right? And then, yes, there's an election going on, and we can pray, and we can vote, and we can continue to pray, but let's be about God's business, right? Okay, so I thought that was an interesting illustration. Thought it was a good illustration. It may not be the last time I share it. I may share it when the teens get back too. I don't know, but let's look this morning at Psalm 23. Psalm 23. Psalm very familiar to a lot of people. When we look at this world, things aren't the way they were created to be. Things aren't the way they should be. There are enemies of the gospel. There are societal issues such as poverty, injustice, systematic racism, immigration. There are personal issues that we face. Broken relationships and marriages, divorce, abuse, alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual perversity, prejudice, hate. There are health issues. It seems like we're not too far removed from the pandemic. We're getting on there, 4 years or so, but yet it still lingers. But we dealt before the pandemic and now after the pandemic with cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, infertility, depression, mental health, heart disease. I mean, the list just goes on. And this world is just not as it was created to be. And some of you may be experiencing some of these problems that I mentioned, and some of you may be struggling with other things that I didn't mention. But we live in a broken world, and when we experience these problems, it may seem like your life sometimes feels like a never-ending march through the valley of the shadow of death. And you may even ask yourself, does the Lord care? Does he care? Does he see me? And so I've entitled this message on Psalm 23, Does the Lord care for his people? Does the Lord care for his people? I want you to see the structure of the psalm because I think it helps us in understanding it, okay? So we have this introduction, the Lord is my shepherd, but then it says, and I shall not want, which when I was a young Christian even, I remember even when I was little, I got this idea in my mind. It was like, why doesn't he want the shepherd? You know, and it took a long time to get that out of my head. I wish they would have changed the translation, quite honestly, but it means I will not lack. Okay? In other words, he provides. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. And so we have two images that are presented to us in this psalm, and they're both given to us here in the first verse. We have the image of a shepherd, and then we have the image of a host, a gracious host. And so those two things are set out there at the beginning of the psalm in verse 1. But then verses 2 and 3, we have in this psalm the structure of someone who is declaring something to himself and to others. Okay, so there's instruction. And so we might say that's the horizontal element. And then we have the vertical element, where the psalmist will stop and he'll speak to the Lord and express his trust and his gratitude for the Lord. So in verses 2 and 3, we have statements to himself, to David, and to others regarding the shepherd, verses 2 and 3. And then in verse 4, we have statements to the Lord regarding his shepherding. And then in verse 5, he switches to a statement to the Lord about his hosting. And then he has statements to himself and to others teaching us about the host. Okay? So that's the structure of the psalm. And I want you to be able to see that. The psalms are often structured in many different ways, but I believe that's the structure that we have in this psalm. And what we have is this, if you want to think of the journey of life, we have a person who is trusting the Lord, and God is shepherding them through life, and he's hosting them through life until finally there's a dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. And so with that in mind, let's read this psalm together, and we're going to take this week and next week to look at Psalm 23. We'll talk about the shepherding aspect this week, and then next week we'll look, Lord willing, at the hosting part. Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Life may be tough right now. You may be traveling through a valley of darkness, but I want you to know that the Lord does care for his people, and he will help you persevere to the end. You see, Christians will persevere in this life because of the protecting presence and plentiful provision of the Lord. We will persevere in this life because of the protecting presence and plentiful provision of the Lord. First, we see the Lord's care